But yes,
Yeah.
that is my take on it. Is like it was a strategic mistake. It could have been like a good propaganda moment, and they made a strategic error. But I think any revolutionary moment of, good God, if your criticism of the revolution is that they killed the ruling aristocratic or God, what's the whatever reigning family, like, are you kidding me? That's your criticism of a revolution? I just, come on.
Yeah. There's when it comes to indefensible things that the Soviet Union did, I would look at the way that class was officially understood specifically in the Stalin era as being sort of hereditary and something that you can marry your way in and out of. Like it's much more of a pre-capitalist understanding of class than it is a socialist understanding of class. And I think the official adoption of that by like the Soviet government is indefensible. But anyway.
Well, I only bring up the Romanov.
We'll definitely have to come back to this as a full episode because there's like so many things I want to start rattling them off now even. But yeah,
I only mention that because it's a clobber inciting incident that comes from sort of official liberaldom that traces the tyranny all the way back to the beginning. I don't think you can just shrug it off. I think you have to make a case.
Right.
Okay, my case is Frederick Engels on authoritarianism. That it's just, what do you fucking think a revolution is, man? Yes, there is a moment where the subject class asserts itself by force of arms over the prevailing social order and remakes society in its own image. Yes, that involves violence. Yes, that involves domination and authority. Yes. But we are remaking society such that these things are no longer, features of human life.
The Christian humanist angel on one shoulder wants to like disagree with you, but then the Bolshevik devil on the other is just like, yeah.
So I agree with everything you just said, Kevin. I just don't think shooting children in a basement qualifies.
No, it should be outside in the sun.
There are also addendum.
I would like to defend.
Okay,
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I just think
you've been trying to talk for a while.
I know.
Yeah, but it's okay.
Last thing. The revolution is many, many things. There are many iterations of that. And I'm just going to reference the Sandinistas who, upon seizing power, outlawed the death penalty.
So did the Bolsheviks.
Yeah, but you know what else is... if you go to Nicaragua now, the Sandinistas are not in power. Anyways, I have two things to say.
Aren't they?
Not no.
Isn't there like they came to power electorally recently, didn't they?
I mean, recently, like sometime in the last 15 years, but
well, no, the Sandinistas are no longer the Sandinistas of
Oh, you're definitely that's correct. Yeah.
So I have two things to say about the Bolshevik killing children question, which is not the question we're answering. By the way.
I'm sorry.
25 minutes into the episode, we have almost finished answering question number 1.
Yeah.
The first thing is there's just 2 quotes. One of them is by Leon Trotsky in 1906 when he was on trial for stirring up the population to revolt, and he said, in his defense, he said, "A rising of the people is not made, gentlemen. It makes itself of its own accord," which is to say, the processes at work in this contradictory society lead people to revolt. So since the revolt's happening, the best thing that you just have to figure out how to respond. The second one is that those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. That's John F. Kennedy. And it's not a revolutionary by any means, but it's just to say that, like, I also don't think it was a good idea. It was not a good thing, and luckily we're not having to account for this. But the Romanovs definitely made it inevitable.
Sure. Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's sort of what I meant when I said like the old regime created the barbarity of the old regime created the barbarians that destroyed it.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. But I mean,
I'm pro-barbarian in this instance.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of inevitability argument, though, would play a lot better if it were sort of like in the chaos of revolution, some rogue actors arrested and murdered the Romanov family, and that's not what happened. It was an order to execute the family from the Central Committee or whatever it was.
Yeah, but during the chaos of revolution, it was when Ekaterinburg was about to be taken over by the whites, and the royal family was going to be like rescued.
Right. Yeah.
So
and so they made a strategic choice that we can criticize with the benefit of hindsight, right? But you can understand why they made that choice. That's absolutely true. Yeah. No, completely. I completely.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to delete this question about, again, not the execution of the Romanovs, but the actual question about the possibility of socialism in the Soviet Union. That one's answered, so I'm going to delete it. Okay.
Okay, and then the other one was
more time on this other point that wasn't even part of the question.
I just enjoy seeing the color rise in your face, Kevin.
Yeah. This is the thing. This is my thing about anti-communism, though, is like, holy shit, there are real fucking vile crimes, indefensible crimes committed by the Bolsheviks, by the USSR that you could talk about, but they never do. They always make up this dumbest bullshit, like the killing of the Romanov family. Like, what do you fucking? It was a revolution, man. They were the ruling family. What do you fucking think happens?
Yeah.
Are you calling me an anti-communist, Kevin?
I'm not saying you are. I'm saying like this is one of those sort of recurring anti-communist like attacks or whatever. They always latch onto the dumbest shit.
Okay, so the next one we're going to answer is the Trotskyist question, right?
That seems appropriate. Yeah.
You're talking about the left.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm in a bit of a crisis. I organize mainly with Trotskyists, so it
sounds like a crisis.
So I had a very underdeveloped understanding of this left tradition. A few months ago, I got my hands on Adam Przeworski's Capitalism and Social Democracy. It reminds me of Studebaker's problems with the left parliamentary strategies, which tend to bend communist strategies to immediacies of parliamentary tactics, Canadian here, and eventually any Marxist party would look like the revisionist SPD in the 30s. Lenin's critique of left comms is vicious, but perhaps he only could pull off his principled stance because the Bolsheviks were in Constituent Assembly too briefly for these game theoretical calculus mentioned on Przeworski to take effect. Sorry for the long question. I'm really stuck. So I had to download and read the introduction and read a couple of reviews of what Capitalism and Social Democracy says. But essentially, it's just that there's a problem with workers' parties getting into power because they drift towards just becoming capitalist parties, and that is absolutely true.
The first and greatest example is the German SPD being like the premier Marxist party in the world, in the leading capitalist nation in the world, becoming an anti-revolution, a counter-revolutionary reformist organization. Yeah.
Yep. I mean that was a conscious decision to bend the ideology towards one of reform and the rejection of revolution. So I would say that rather than a drift, I mean there was a drift that led up to that point, right? Officially adapting Bernstein as the ideology of the party, but I don't necessarily know how inevitable any of that is. I do think that there is seriously a tendency to drift. But I think that there are, revolutionary situations will cause non-revolutionaries to become revolutionaries. And I think that if you had a principled Marxist social democratic party in power that always had this eventual goal of seizing the means of production in a revolution, that the possibility that rupture happens there and it becomes a revolutionary party could happen. I think that they're on the cusp of that in Chile in 1979. Was it 79?
No,
70, 72, I think.
72.
72.
Well,
yeah.
with Allende, you know.
Yeah, the first
And I
9/11
think
was 73, right?
right. Yeah. And then I would say that history is not a one-to-one indicator of the way things are going to be, because we can never recreate the situations in which those things happened. It's not like the way a lot of Marxists treat it, especially the people in the ISO, is that like you can create revolutions in specific situations, and if you look at history, this element, that element, and this element, they're all there, so that means a revolution is going to happen, which leads to
Right.
lots of terrible predictions throughout the years. I would say that the best hope that we possibly have is to create a mass party. And I'd say the only way that in the West, a mass party will have any sort of staying power or any sort of respectability is if it engages in electoral politics. And I'd say that it would be worth the possibility that we might drift too far in the opposite direction for us to create that party. But I would say that that is way far away from what our problems in the United States are. Maybe different in Canada. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
you know.
What I was just thinking is like, I agree with you, Chris. I don't think we can make pronouncements about inevitability unless we're seeing. So the other side of this picture, thinking about versions of state socialism that go the Bernstein route, is the nature, the contingency of global capital. And I don't think we can apply an inevitability to anything unless we're doing that to capital and seeing capital through a kind of telos. And I don't think that's reality.
No, and I also think that it's really important that it matters where we identify power as emanating from and the purpose of power. Because a parliamentary party, which
Right.
is beholden to a party which is rooted in the workplaces, is very different than a parliamentary party which is conception of power is rooted in the parliament and
Right.
and the vague, the mass broad society. Like, if people like this, then we should do it so we can stay in power, because when we are in power, then we get to do things for people. Because if that's your mentality, it doesn't really matter if you officially are for radical whatever things. I think the real problem with the SPD is that they have no conception of power, which is rooted in any other place other than the parliament, which they all happen to where they sit. It's not that they have officially abandoned revolution as a concept, although that's also a problem. But it's that they, even if they officially did not abandon it, and if they were in power as a nominally revolutionary formation, it wouldn't matter, because their conception of power would still hem them in. They would still be unable to do anything other than be, honestly, what I think that the SPD would be great if they were only reformists, but they're not even that. They're Social Democrat today is not reformist.
Right.
That would be awesome if they were only reformists.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, I think that's the crux of it for me anyway. That's what I would say is what I would emphasize is an aspect of what Chris said, is that too much of the contemporary left is concerned with trying to play act at historical arguments in historical places and times or whatever, and they're trying to answer questions that are not being posed today, right here, right now. They're trying to prevent problems that are not presented to us currently. So let's look at what the problems are that face us here now today and answer those questions. And my God, of course, we don't want to disregard history, and we don't want to pretend like past problems that have arisen aren't potentialities that will confront us in the future that we need to be mindful of. But absolutely we do. But let's not put the cart before the horse. Let's answer the questions that are actually presented to us now in ways that are best informed by history, absolutely, but but let's answer the questions that are actually presented to us, not questions that might be presented to us many steps down the road from where we currently are.
Yeah, that's good. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. So, what on earth is left communism? How can Anton Pennicock and Bordiga be in the same category? Is ultra leftism something different? I understand these. Who's moving the fucking thing? While
I understand these camps to be quite distinct from left opposition.
I think that answers the question.
Jason just scrolled the fucking document while I was reading it and like made it so I scrolled it up out of my view.
Yeah, but that was cool though. So don't
it was cool that Ben picked it up.
Jason is the resident saboteur today.
Quick answer to this, I think, is that I think that most people would consider Pennicock a council communist and Bordiga a left communist, in as much as those categories actually mean anything. Bordiga is certainly not a council communist.
No.
Yeah.
But Pennicock could be considered a left-wing communist.
Right.
But not necessarily left com proper, because that's its own category, which includes Bordiga.
Yeah, it's kind of it's confusing because it's kind of like the way that Friedrich Engels was a social democrat. Lenin was a social democrat, and also Leninists hate social democrats because Lenin was also a communist, just like Friedrich Engels was also a communist.
Or just like Marx was a socialist, and Bakunin was a socialist.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
like when he writes left-wing communism and infantile disorder, he's talking about what we now would call council communists. Bordiga and Pennicock and Gorder and people like this, and also Rosa Luxemburg in some ways, would all be left communists, but there's at least three distinct, let's call them tendencies in that. Like Bordiga and Pennicock and Luxemburg are not the same kind of political figure.
Completely distinct.
So,
I was thinking of what you told us last on the Masaryk episode, Chris, about doing that little rabbit hole on translation of the left-wing communism.
Oh yeah.
And then, I guess the alternate translation that I saw, which I don't know, seems to be more accurate, but my knowledge of Russian is only 1 year worth of Russian that I took in undergraduate, was that it was the childish disease of leftism rather than left-wing communism and infantile disorder.
Right. Well, that actually kind of that gets at what I think actually makes all these figures, which are widely varying in their political philosophies, how they are all broadly, you could characterize them all as left-wing or a left communist or whatever, which is that they have a conception of revolution, of class struggle as being much more spontaneous, much more like it doesn't, there's no need for like the dictatorship of the proletariat, the transitional forms. There's even for some of them, even the party itself is kind of like it's like a weird sort of break that you could place on consciousness. All these organizational formations, which are like inbuilt conservative barriers to revolutionary impulses and expressions. And in that way, what Lenin is calling this infantile disorder, or whatever, is something which affects all of them to some degree, even if they all propose some other kind of prescription for what to do in the in political life. They all disagree with the compromises that come from being a political formation and standing for something which consciousness is not always catching up to. So like Bordiga doesn't really like democracy so much.
Yeah.
And Pennicock
organic centralism as opposed to democratic centralism.
Yeah, exactly.
Like because the party substitutes itself for the party is the will of the working class, and democracy is unnecessary.
Right.
If I understand it correctly.
And Pennacook, in a very similar but also entirely different ways, almost on the opposite end. Like, the party is a check on the revolutionary impulses from the masses. In both cases, though, they are critical of the Bolshevik and social democratic model of the Workers' Party as the embodiment of not just the aspirations of the class, but also the conduct of the class in a given setting. So ultra-leftism is not a fixed ideology. It's what happens when you don't have that that anchor, that pole that you can kind of waffle around. If you don't have the party, then you're just veering off into one direction or another based upon any number of things which, as long as you consider it to be the right way. It's kind of like how the Anglican liturgy is not at all the same. It's kind of like how Protestants are whatever they want to be. The Westboro Baptist Church and the Lutheran Church they're both Protestants, and they're also entirely different.